So this is sort of like my age in this industry and being a little bit out of the loop in terms of developers. Because I started my career in the like early 2000s as a front end developer, and what that meant back then was I was an expert in HTML and CSS. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe like I would know a tiny thing or two about like not even JavaScript, but like just jQuery back then, right?
Yeah.
So fast forward 10, 15 years now, a front end, like a professional front end developer, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, like they definitely have HTML, CSS chops, but they are a JavaScript expert. Would you say they're much heavier? They're much more of a programmer these days than like a design. Like I was much more like a designer,
Yeah. I mean, that's maybe that. Yeah, let's maybe take a step back and be upfront about this. Like, Userlist is a Rails application in the backend, but it doesn't have any view logic, any styling whatsoever. It's basically just an JSON API, and then it's a front end code base in Ember.js.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a separate repository that just talks to the backend, and there are pros and cons to doing it like this. Again,
I did want to ask you about that. So okay, so it's like a headless like Rails API.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's just an API with a few small exceptions, but for the most part, it's just the API. It's just shuffling data around, and the front end is its own code base, has its own test suite, has all the styling, all the UI. So it's literally two separate code bases, and that also kind of explains why we're working on stuff separately some of the time, because it's actually what it is. Like, there's no connection other than the API.
Is that separation? I know that's sort of like the more modern way to build most SaaS applications these days. Not all of them. I mean, we're completely integrated in ZipMessage, just a Rails app. A ton of views and ERB, and then Stimulus.js for handling a lot of which is essentially vanilla JavaScript wrapped in some Stimulus controllers.
Yeah.
And a ton of Tailwind CSS. Like that's our stack that builds ZipMessage. Like, is that separation for you? Like, is that how you built most of your projects before Userlist?
It was definitely a setup that I was familiar with from my previous product that I've built, and so we didn't really question it in that sense. I feel like these days the pendulum has swung a little bit in the other direction. These days it's more like, let's build like just a Rails code base that does the real-time stuff using Turbo and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Where does Ember.js fit? Like, I've heard so much about it, but I really know nothing about how it works. Like, how does Ember compare to like Vue or React or that sort of stuff? Is it like lighter weight? Like, what is it?
It's more like heavier weight React or Vue, I guess.
Interesting.
To me, Ember.js is basically the Rails of the front end. Where it's basically the battery included front end framework, similar to Rails is like the backend framework that brings everything. And it's been around for like it kind of grew out of Rails as well in a way. So a lot of core Rails people eventually went off and built Ember. Well, maybe not a lot, but a couple.
I feel like this front
and to
end...
me it had.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
To me, it had like a similar feeling of like when I first was using Ember.js, I had a similar feeling to when first using Rails, where it magically just worked.
Yeah, it's just easy, right?
Yeah.
I feel like the front end land is where I'm most out of touch these days, which is weird because I come from a background as a front end and designer, but I've had a few experiences. This is going back to like around 2017 or so, 2016, 17, I was working on a SaaS project, and the developers chose to use Vue.js, and I knew nothing about that. I literally only knew the HTML side, and it was plugged into a Laravel app, which I also knew nothing about at the time. And my experience and my understanding of Vue and things like it, like React, you could do interesting things with it. You can make these single page applications with it, but it added so much more complexity to building and maintaining. And we saw we introduced so many new bugs with every new feature, just like UI bugs, that it just became so frustrating for me that once I really dug into learning full stack and I got heavily into Rails, I got so excited about the idea of like never touching big JavaScript frameworks like that ever again. And, just sticking to like Stimulus.js, which is now called Turbo. And, because frankly, we're able to build like highly interactive stuff using simple, vanilla, just browser-based stuff, and I love it that way, but I often wonder, like, what are we missing out on now with things like Ember.js or whatever other sort of front-end tools or workflows? Because, you have this advantage of having, a whole career as a developer, like technical, like sort of like in the trenches on this stuff. And I feel like I've dipped in and out of development, and in the last few years, just much heavier building these products, but like I don't have all those years of experience to sort of having played around with different approaches, so I'm always sort of like curious, like, so like you find like with Ember and having this like separated like front end, it's actually more efficient, not from a user perspective, but I mean for you guys, like shipping speed and maintaining the app, like it's a pretty solid setup, you feel?
So again, like I chose this because I was familiar with it. So yeah, it felt like an easy choice. In hindsight, I don't think we got all of the benefits from like splitting this off from the get-go. Like it definitely made stuff harder than it needed to be. And I feel like only these days where we're like getting more ambitious in terms of what we want to do on the front end and what like in terms of interactivity and how things feel and how things react. I think we're only now starting to slowly see the benefits of having a setup like this. Because it's true. I mean, it's more complicated of a setup than just going with vanilla Rails that just does HTML, ERB, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript here and there. But like for example, one of the things I always had on our roadmap was having a visual workflow builder that allows people to like orchestrate their campaigns and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it in the back end is already designed to work like that. But we never got around to building the front end for it. And it's only now that we're like, right? Yeah, that's a beast. And I felt like that beast was enough of a reason to choose a JavaScript or like a JavaScript framework to be able to,
because it's like someday we're going to need to build it. We might
like
as well.
Someday we're going to need that flexibility or like that reactiveness, I guess is the term. And it's now actually on the roadmap. We're actually going to build it at some point. It was supposed to be the next big thing we work on. Maybe there's something in between, but we'll see. That's the process we're trying to figure out right now. But I feel like those 5 years, maybe it was a waste of, well, not necessarily a waste, but maybe it slowed us down more than it benefited us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I regret the decision, because in parts, like, it makes things super convenient, but in other parts, it makes it harder than just like plain out HTML from the Rails, from the Rails backend. So it's always I don't know.
It does seem like it does seem like it's a good long-term choice. I mean, we're actually starting to we're not going to like rebuild anything anytime soon, but like we're starting to think about a mobile app for Zip Message, like a dedicated iOS and Android app. And for that, we'd probably start to move toward like, all right, we have our API, and then the mobile app talks to it, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that might come sometime next year. Before we wrap up, I did want to touch on something because we just really went deep on this over at ZipMessage, is testing. Writing automated tests. I know it's something you're very experienced in, and this is where. All right, I'm just going to talk about like the challenge that we just had with it.
Yeah.
And this is so much about my inexperience in like writing and using tests in software development. Again, a few years back, a few attempts ago with SaaS, we had no tests, and I experienced the pain of having like zero test coverage, right? So then when I got into Process Kit and then in ZipMessage, I went way the other way. Like, we need 100% test coverage on every single thing we ever build, right? And it helped, but I think what I'm literally just learning recently now is, so I just spent so much effort, and me and my team, on writing feature tests, integration tests, which are clearly like the slowest to run, the most brittle. They fail the most in different environments, and we've built up hundreds and hundreds of these feature tests. And so just I think that we ended up like way too heavy on the feature test side and too light on like unit tests and request tests and things like that. And so that's one of the things that I'm learning now is we should have kept the test coverage up the whole way through, but much more on the unit test side than the feature request side. So I'm curious, like, what can you speak to in terms of your approach to having a well-tested application, and what is your approach to actually writing tests for every new feature? Do you do like test-driven development where you're writing the test first? Do you do it afterward? What types of tests? How does it all kind of fit together for you?
Yeah. So I feel like I want to address the feature tests a little bit. I feel like if you're not writing any tests, start by writing feature tests, because they test a lot of things in one go. Like, you write one test and they test almost all of it,
and that was the thinking. Like, if we have a good feature test written, then we mostly know that like most of what's happening under the hood is working because the test passed, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's totally the right approach.
And for anyone listening who is not familiar with this, just a quick thing, like, by feature test, we mean like literally writing an automated test that like kind of clicks through a browser experience, a user like clicking this button, and then they should see this, and then they go onto this page, and this should happen, and confirm that this element is on the page, and then it passes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very high level, and therefore it tests the entire thing because it's literally acting like a user. And the downside is it's super slow, and yes, it can be super brittle if you're not super careful, because you change the label of the button and suddenly the test doesn't work anymore because it wants to click on the save button and not on the next step button or whatever. In our application, I think we're even lacking a little bit of the feature tests, because at this stage we don't have automated tests that do the full stack, like from the browser through our API to the database, because it's separate code bases. That is a lot harder than it maybe should be. So we are testing the front end in isolation and the back end in isolation at this stage. So on the front end, that means we're doing tests for like kind of unit tests for individual components. So we want to make sure that we have a drop down. If you click it, it shows a menu. And then if you hit the arrow key, it moves to the next item and stuff like that. So we test these things in isolation. And then we have kind of like feature tests where we test, like, you go to the sign up page, you enter your name and your email address and your password and click next. And you get a confirmation, and there's an API call to the backend that creates that user. So we test those parts on the front end, and then on the back end we do a lot of I personally do a lot of unit tests, because I feel like it's the easiest way to test business logic, because you're just like checking that a few small components are working correctly in an isolated fashion. And then on top of that, we do a little bit of request specs where we like, okay, if I make a GET request to this resource, I should get this list back, and it doesn't include users that belong to a different account or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we do, in a way, it's a little bit like feature testing, but again, it's not like the full stack; it's just the API. But most of our tests
are you writing as you implement the feature? You're writing tests?
Depends a little bit. I'm not doing test-driven development these days, because I feel like test-driven development is great if you know what you're building.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we have a rough idea of what we want, but
it takes shape after it's in the browser.
Yeah, it takes a while until you actually know what you're building and you actually know how it's supposed to behave.
Yeah.
So what usually happens is that we build something rough, then add tests for it, and then in the process of adding tests to it, figure out where it's actually broken. So it's a lot of like doing an experiment, having a thesis of what we like to do, and then playing around with it either in the browser or using the Rails console in development by just like hooking stuff up. And once we're fairly certain that it's got the correct behavior, we start adding tests for like all the edge cases. And yeah, as you write the tests, you usually come up with like crazy ideas how to break this.
Yeah.
And more often than not, you actually break it and learn about things you haven't considered before. And then we adjust the code again, and it's a little bit of back and forth.
This is, again, it's one of those things where like we just literally went through a whole 2 weeks of my developer and I like going through our whole test suite, literally removing a lot of feature tests that were just too redundant, adding a lot of headache to running our tests, making them like less useful, and then adding things like parallel, like running the tests in parallel, and then now like now going forward, like our policy, me and my developers, is to focus much more on the unit test side. And I guess from a workflow standpoint, because we used to always build features and then write the feature tests as the final step in the shipping process, right? Like we would, or one of the final steps, like we would build the feature, manually test it, and then make sure we write a bunch of mostly feature tests to make sure it's all working. And that's sort of, that workflow can work when you're using feature tests, but I feel like with unit tests, you want to be writing those as you build the methods and the service objects and the workers and stuff like that. Like otherwise, it's hard to like go back and find all those pieces to write tests for.
Yeah, it happens really close to each other. Like at some point at the same time. But I again rarely do the test first and then write the code afterwards. It's more like developing it together and sort of. Yeah. Well, I feel like also.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like what's nice about getting the unit tests really solid is like that's in my books that's the place where the serious problems arise. Like in terms of if you get the business logic wrong, in our case we might be sending the wrong email to the wrong user or stuff like that, or sending too much emails or stuff like that. So we always try to get that part nailed down as much as possible. And then like if the UI shows the slightly wrong state or maybe the page doesn't load in the UI, that's less of a problem.
Yeah.
Like sure, it's
totally.
not great, but it's also not causing an email to one of our customers and like upsetting them about our customer and stuff like that. So
100%. And we have I put like an important tag, like the word important, on probably 20% of our tests, because this is like a really important part of the app that gets used every single day, So I use the
you
important
don't
tag.
want to break the core, right?
Yeah, like the things that like signing up for an account and sending a message and that sort of stuff are like, if we're gonna, like, we routinely run 100% of our tests, but if we want to just make sure that the most important stuff are working, then we'll just run the important ones, right? And then same thing with Stripe, which is our billing system. At any test that interacts with Stripe, we put a Stripe tag on it, so that, like, again, like anything billing related, we want to make sure that we're not going to double charge someone, or that we're handling like planned downgrades and upgrades correctly and stuff like that. So it's always a tricky process.
Yeah.
Well, Benedikt, this is awesome. I love getting the chance to like geek out with someone on the tech side of SaaS. I do feel like there are, there's a lot of like podcasts that are like just for developers just talking code, but that's not necessarily like about SaaS. And then there's a lot of SaaS podcasts that are mostly talking about marketing. They're not really talking about the actual product. So I'm glad we have these couple of episodes here to talk a little product. So it feels good.
Yeah, I feel like there's room for a technical SaaS podcast or something like that.
There should be. Yeah, man. Well, hopefully we'll do this again. I'll keep keeping tabs on Userlist. I love what you guys are doing. I think it's really exciting. I really feel like you guys are starting to really hit your stride in terms of building some really interesting things. We'll be waiting for the visual workflow builder. should come any day now.
Hopefully
right?
soon. Yeah, like, I mean, both me and our front end developer were both excited about getting to this, but looking at customer feedback, there might be something else that's more requested than this. So maybe it makes sense to do this other thing first.
Yeah, and folks, if you have not tried Userlist or like, really, I do recommend giving it a look, especially just from a design standpoint. If you're just going to like look at the website and the interface, you and Jane have done a really fantastic job with it. It's pretty impressive. So.
Thank you. Well, the design is 100% on Jane. I'm just making sure I build it the way she wants it.
Hey, I mean, the styling, sure, but like, I strongly believe that the design of software happens at front to back. I
Sure.
literally think of designing, from database models to how it interacts with the user. So I think you guys have done an awesome job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Benedikt.
Yep. Thanks.